Well, since it's summertime and, people are out at the beach, enjoying the weather, swimming in the ocean, I figured it would be a good idea to cover what is no doubt the best shark movie ever released, and one which for me sparked my lifelong, absolutely god-awful fear of sharks. Not the best fear to have when you grow up right near the ocean. But aside from that, if you haven't guessed what movie we're covering today in this video, it's Jaws. One of the more clearly identifiable rifles used in this film is none other than the M1 Garand, which can be seen in the hands of a few different characters throughout the film. But it probably has its most notable scene during the end of the movie when Chief Brody uses it to shoot and blow up the oxygen tank, the same one that he was able to throw into the shark's mouth earlier when it broke through the side of the cabin. Yeah, I'll get to the realism behind that scene in a bit. Stay tuned. The M1 Garand is a semi-automatic rifle that was a standard service rifle for the US military during World War II as well as the Korean War. The gun was designed by Canadian-American Jean Canchis Garand, more commonly known as John C. Garand. Why the fuck did I just pronounce his name like that? I'll explain. So before I get bombarded in the comments section, technically John C. Garand actually pronounced his name that way. And while technically speaking, the M1 Garand should really be pronounced M1 Garand. But I'm just going to be calling it the Garand for this video since that's how I've heard it pronounced from everyone my entire life. That's apparently how the troops referred to it during the war, and that's literally how the War Department pronounced it in official training material. So that's the reason why I'm pronouncing it the way I am. But at the end of the day, pronounce it how you want. As long as you understand what I'm saying, who really cares? Alright, moving on. In his early life, John had quite an interest in machinery, as well as a great fondness for target shooting, which would come to blend into his hobby of designing firearms. Later on, he would be employed as an engineer at the Springfield Armory in 1919. There, he was tasked with designing a basic, gas-actuated, self-loading infantry rifle that would eject the spent cartridge and reload a new round using a gas-operated system. However, designing a rifle that was that practical in terms of effectiveness, reliability, and production wasn't a so-called simple task. It would actually end up taking 15 years to perfect the M1 prototype model to meet all the US Army specifications. The resulting rifle was patented by Garand in 1932, approved by the US Army on January 9, 1936, and entered into mass production in 1940. It replaced the bolt-action M1903 Springfield and became the standard infantry rifle. During World War II, over 4 million of these rifles were manufactured, with the M1 proving not only to be an extremely effective rifle, but a very reliable one as well. Not only was it praised by General MacArthur, but apparently even General Patton wrote, "In my opinion, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised." What was probably one of the most wild things to learn about when doing the research on this weapon was that John Garand, the man that actually made the frickin' rifle, never received any royalties from his design, despite an estimated over 6.5 million being manufactured in total. Unfortunately, he transferred all rights regarding his inventions to the US on January 20th, 1936. This was actually because he worked at Springfield Armory, which at the time was a government-run facility, meaning anything he designed on the clock legally belonged to the US government, and his yearly salary was considered fair compensation.
I value my neck a lot more than $3,000, Chief.
After the war, Congress did try to award him $100,000, about $1.3 million adjusted for inflation, as a thank you, but the bill ultimately failed to pass, mainly because many of the people in government at the time felt he was simply just doing his job, and apparently didn't want to spend taxpayer money on what they saw as a symbolic gesture. Of course they didn't. Now, I'm not saying I completely disagree with their decision. I get it, he was just doing his job, but I mean, come on. You couldn't have just given him the $100,000. I feel like that's pocket change for them. He did receive some recognition, as in 1973, he was inducted into the US Army Ordnance Corps Hall of Fame for designing the M1 Garand, and the Hall of Fame entry acknowledges both Garand's inventive genius and engineering skills. I'll put what it reads here on screen. The M1 Garand is a .30 caliber, gas-operated, 8-shot clip-fed, semi-automatic rifle. The rifle was designed for simple assembly and disassembly to facilitate field maintenance. It can be field stripped without tools in just a few seconds. During World War II, the M1 rifle's semi-automatic operation gave US infantrymen a significant edge in both firepower and shot-to-shot recovery compared to enemy troops who were mostly using bolt-action rifles. Its reduced recoil and rapid-fire capability allowed soldiers to fire all 8 rounds as fast as they could pull the trigger, without needing to shift their hands or break their firing position and point of aim. Another iconic feature of the M1 Garand is its block clip, which is made to hold 8 rounds of .30-06 Springfield ammunition. John Garand designed the M1 rifle around the block clip system from the beginning, largely because the US Army wanted a flush-mounted, internal magazine, and rejected the idea of detachable box magazines, fearing soldiers would lose them in combat. You might be thinking, well, that's kind of ironic. Why would they say no to magazines, but yes to block clips? Can't you lose block clips just as easily as one might would with a magazine? Well, yes, but here was their thinking. The block clips were much more cost-effective to manufacture and were meant to be disposable. They weren't expecting for soldiers to be picking them up and keeping track of them like they would with magazines, which were much more expensive to produce, and a lot of times are crucial to the actual function of a rifle. Whereas with the M1, if a block clip was lost, the rifle could still be used with single loads of ammunition. Obviously not ideal in combat, but hey, it's better than nothing. The clip allowed soldiers to reload quickly by inserting 8 rounds at once, and it automatically ejected after the last shot. While the system provided fast reloads and met military requirements, it also made the rifle more complex and slightly heavier. It was ultimately a design shaped by logistical concerns and battlefield practicality, not simplicity. A really interesting piece of history regarding the block clip with the M1 Garand is how the ejection of an empty clip produced a distinctive metallic ping sound. During World War II, a rumor spread that German and Japanese soldiers were using the sound to their advantage, listening for it in battle as a signal that an American rifleman was out of ammo. In response, the U.S. Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground reportedly tested plastic clips to reduce the noise, though no alternatives were ever adopted. On the other hand, some former German soldiers later claimed the sound was barely audible during combat and not reliable enough to act on, especially with other armed soldiers nearby. Given the overwhelming noise of battle, it's highly unlikely that any U.S. serviceman was killed solely because of the ping sound. However, some soldiers still took it seriously. A few American veterans even recalled throwing the empty clips to mimic the sound, hoping it would lure the enemy into revealing their position. Now, this is just rumor-based. There isn't any real military evidence suggesting this was a common occurrence during the war, but I mean, it seems like it could be legit. Again, the M1 Garand can be seen in the hands of a few different characters throughout the film, including one of the deputies at the beginning when those 2 kids pranked the entire beach with that fake shark fin.
He made me do it. He told me to do it.
Quint's character can later be seen using it to shoot at the shark. But what's really interesting is he can be seen pulling back the charging handle multiple times after shooting it to eject the spent cartridge, which is really odd since, as we just went over, it's a semi-automatic rifle, so it should be cycling on its own. I was really curious though if they did this on purpose in the film, maybe to just depict them having faulty weapons when facing the shark, or if this was what actually happened to the rifle when they were shooting due to faulty blanks, as that can happen sometimes, and maybe Spielberg just thought it would be a cool detail to add to the film. But it does seem to be working fine later when Brody uses it. But anyways, I couldn't find anything to say for sure on that, so I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments. Chief Brody can be seen using it in the end of the film to finally blow up and kill the shark. Real close, it appears that the block clip can actually be seen ejecting from the weapon on the last shot. Pretty cool. Speaking of that scene where he blows up the shark using the oxygen tank, let's take a look at that in greater detail. Work in real life? Not exactly like that, at least not the way it goes down in the movie. Scuba tanks aren't bombs, they're filled with compressed air, not explosives. The air inside is usually about 21% oxygen and 79% nitrogen. At least this is the standard for most recreational dives at about 130 feet. Of course this can vary between depths, and there's no fuel or ignition source in scuba tanks, so for the shark's entire body to literally explode like it did, realistically wouldn't happen. But here's the thing, scuba tanks can be very dangerous if they fail.
Damn it, Martin! This is compressed air. You screw around with these tanks and they're gonna blow up.
But the real threat isn't a massive fireball, it's pressure. Under certain rare conditions, a tank can rupture or even explode, but this is usually from very specific circumstances, such as the tank being seriously overfilled, damaged from impact, corroded on the inside, or has manufacturing defects. But all of these would 9 times out of 10 cause the tank to rupture and either vent out its air violently, potentially sending the tank off like a missile, or the air would just vent out and go empty. Very, very rarely have there been cases of tanks actually exploding, and by that I mean the tank literally rupturing into fragments and sending metal shrapnel flying. That kind of catastrophic failure is extremely uncommon, especially underwater, and would almost always require extreme overpressurization. Heat also plays a major role in tank safety, because when temperature rises, so does internal pressure. That's why divers are taught to store full tanks in cool places. During hydrostatic testing, tanks are usually pressurized to around 4,500 psi in a controlled underwater chamber to ensure that they can safely handle more than their standard 3,000 psi fill. This gives a generous safety margin, but it doesn't make them indestructible. So like Brody does in the film, bullets can puncture a scuba tank, but again, most of the time the tank will just vent rapidly and worst case scenario shoot around like a rocket. The Mythbusters actually tested this in their 18th episode of their 10th season, using the same M1 rifle and rounds Brody uses, 30-06. and although it was able to pierce the tank, and one even did vent rapidly, apparently blowing out the tail of the shark, none of them exploded like the one in the film did. Even if you're using things like incendiary rounds, again, there's no fuel source in the tank to ignite it. However, the Mythbusters did find that once they fitted the tank with a small amount of C4 and detonated in the fake shark's mouth, it not only ripped its head off, but tore the thing to pieces. So who knows, maybe when Brody first threw the tank into Bruce's mouth, maybe he tossed some C4 in there too. Another cool fact about this scene in particular too, is how on the last day of filming when they did the explosion, Steven Spielberg wasn't even actually there. Apparently after such a long and disastrous production shoot, Spielberg believed that once they would finally be done with filming, the crew was going to throw him in the water. So he just didn't show up.
And I'm out. Write that down. Take it sleazy and I'm out, or my last words, and I'm killing myself. Take it sleazy!
And funny enough, this would go on to become a tradition for Spielberg on all of his films going forward. This movie was also just Spielberg's second full-length feature film in his career at that time. He was just 26 years old when he was brought on to direct the movie after the success of his first feature-length film, The Sugarland Express. By far one of the most iconic weapons used in Jaws is Quint's harpoon gun, which appears to be a greener light harpoon gun made by the British firm W.W. Greener, a company that remarkably is still in business today with a descendant of its founder on the board. I'm sure most of you know this, but just for some context, a harpoon is a long, spear-like projectile traditionally used for hunting large marine animals such as whales, tuna, and sharks. Designed with barbs or toggling heads, it's meant to impale the target and stay lodged in it, allowing hunters to reel it in using an attached rope or chain. Harpoons have been used for centuries in whaling, fishing, and sealing, and later adapted for scientific research to capture marine animals alive for study. While early harpooning was done by hand from small boats, a dangerous and labor-intensive process, the development of harpoon guns allowed for greater range, accuracy, and safety, making them a vital tool for both commercial and research work at sea. However, in today's time, the use of the harpoon gun as a whole has mainly shifted towards non-lethal applications. Modern variations of the harpoon gun, such as darting guns, are employed for tagging, tracking, and collecting biological samples, hopefully without causing harm to marine animals. That said, harpoon guns are still used lethally today in certain commercial whaling operations, particularly in countries like Japan, Norway, and Iceland. In the film, Quint can be seen using the greener light harpoon gun several times to fire at the shark and attach the yellow tracking barrels. Originally designed for sport fishing and line launching, the greener harpoon gun fired its projectile with a specially loaded .38 special blank cartridge, accurate out to about 30 yards. It featured a 20-inch hard-chromed barrel to resist corrosion at sea, and was sold in a wooden case complete with harpoons, ropes, line holders, and blanks. With heavy-duty lines, it was effective against large game like sharks and tuna, and also found use in scientific capture and conservation work. Its takedown design made it highly portable and easy to store, both on land and at sea. Not only was this weapon featured in Jaws, but it was also featured in the film Orca, which was released just 2 years after Jaws. At the time, it wasn't very well received and got much criticism, with many calling it a copycat to Jaws. It's been a long time since I've seen the full film Orca, but I don't know, I remember actually enjoying it. In the film, Quint has Hooper tie off the rope connected to the harpoon gun to yellow barrels so they can be used to help track the shark, as well as supposedly tire it out when it tries to drag the barrels underwater with it. Now, for anyone wondering, could a 25-foot, 3-ton great white shark actually drag 3 sealed, 30-gallon plastic barrels underwater like that?
Can't stay down with 3 barrels on it. Not with 3 barrels he can.
Pretty unlikely, but a bit more believable than it first seems. Each sealed 30-gallon barrel filled with air displaces about 260 pounds of seawater, as 1 gallon of seawater is equal to about 8.6 pounds, which means it creates roughly 260 pounds of upward buoyant force. So 3 barrels together, that's around 780 pounds of lift trying to yank upwards on the shark. And while a full-grown great white shark that size, if it even existed, would be incredibly strong, it would still need to generate over 780 pounds of sustained pulling force to keep them all underwater. It could potentially dive and briefly drag the barrels underwater with enough speed and momentum, but holding them there underwater for an extended period of time like the shark does in the film, probably just not going to happen. You have to remember that the shark is also dealing with things like drag, water resistance, and the fact that strength varies from shark to shark, depending on age, sex, and health. So in reality, it's just not likely. If you're scratching your head because of why I said if one even existed, that's because there actually has never been a confirmed, verified great white larger than 19.5 feet. Not saying they don't exist or haven't existed, megalodons, but in our time, no one has actually confirmed a shark being that size Bruce is in the film. The largest great white shark, accurately measured and verified, was a 19.5-foot specimen caught off Ledge Point, Australia in March 1984. However, there are unverified reports and estimations of larger sharks, including Deep Blue, a large female great white that is estimated to be around 20 feet, but this is just from photos or videos and not precise scientific measurement. There's only one handgun used in this film, but it plays a major role being that it's the sidearm of Chief Martin Brody, and he can be seen using a Smith & Wesson Model 15. Initially known as the K38 Combat Masterpiece, the Smith & Wesson Model 15 is a 6-shot, double-action revolver that was introduced in 1949. Featuring adjustable open sights, it's built on Smith & Wesson's medium-sized K-frame while being chambered for 38 special cartridges. Most models are typically fitted with a 4-inch barrel, though additional barrel options have been offered at various times during its production. The Model 15 is a derivative of the classic 1899 K-frame military and police revolver. In the years following World War II, Smith & Wesson began producing several different variations of the M&P as separate models, with the Model 15 being one of them. The Model 15 was given its name in 1957 when all Smith & Wesson revolvers were given numerical model numbers. For military use, this weapon seemed to be first adopted by the U.S. Air Force, first purchasing models in 1956, specifically for the Strategic Air Command Elite Guard. The Air Force would go on to keep purchasing large numbers of them from 1960 to 1969. They were also the standard-issued sidearm of the United States Air Force Security Forces from 1962 to 1992, as well as being issued to security personnel and other branches of the U.S. Armed Forces, including some units of the Naval Security Forces. In addition to military use, the Model 15 was issued by many police departments across the United States, as well as various federal law enforcement agencies, probably being most notable for its use in the LAPD. The LAPD Model 15 revolvers apparently were modified to fire double action only. This was accomplished by the department armorer, who would ground the full cock notch from the hammers. Officers were then trained to shoot combat style without ever cocking the weapons. This change was likely the result of unintended injuries and/or property damage, and of litigation against the LAPD after some officers had cocked their weapons only to have them discharged inadvertently, possibly as a result of physical attacks or having been startled during the course of searching for suspects.
Marker.
Gun jam.
Okay, once again, cut it. Action.
Gun doesn't fire.
Cut. And action.
Gun doesn't work.
Cut. And action.
Ah, fuck. Please.
Brody can be seen using it to fire at the shark one of the times it swims past the orca. One really interesting fact about the filming of this movie that many people might not know is that the character of Hooper was originally supposed to die during the scene toward the end when he goes down in the shark cage.
They're all gonna die.
This would have mirrored his fate in the original novel, where he's killed by the shark. But while they were filming real footage of great whites to include in the movie, one of the sharks actually attacked and destroyed the cage they were using. Real shark footage was captured by Ron and Valerie Taylor off Dangerous Reef in South Australia. To make the sharks appear massive, they used a short actor inside a scaled-down shark cage. During filming, a great white unexpectedly attacked the cage, and the resulting footage was so dramatic that Spielberg was determined to include it in the actual movie. However, at the time of the attack, no one was actually in the shark cage, thankfully, but the original script, which was being faithful to the novel, had Hooper wind up getting killed during the dive. To make use of the footage, the story was changed so that Hooper survives by escaping from the cage, and that's how they came up with the idea of him escaping the cage and hiding on the ocean floor. Another rifle we can see back earlier in the film can be seen in the hands of the deputies and Coast Guardsmen who are out patrolling the waters for the Great White. One of the men on the boats is holding what appears to be an M1 carbine, although strangely, he doesn't appear to have any magazine loaded up inside of it. The M1 carbine is a lightweight, semi-automatic chambered in 30 carbine cartridges, or 7.62 by 33mm, that was issued to the US military and used during World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. Believe it or not, despite having a similar name and physical outward appearance, the M1 carbine is not a carbine version of the M1 Garand rifle. Prior to World War II, production of this weapon came about after the U.S. Army Ordnance Department received reports that the full-size M1 rifle was too heavy and cumbersome for most support troops to carry, people like staff, artillerymen, radiomen, etc. The request called for a compact, lightweight defensive weapon with greater range, accuracy, and firepower than a handgun, while weighing half as much as the Thompson submachine gun or the M1 rifle. The U.S. Army decided that a carbine-type weapon would adequately fulfill all of these requirements, and specified that the new arm should weigh no more than 5 pounds and have an effective range of 300 yards. Paratroopers were also added to the list of intended users, and a folding stock version with a pistol-style grip would also be developed. The M1 carbine, with its reduced power, 30 caliber cartridges, was not originally intended to serve as a primary weapon for combat infantrymen, nor was it comparable to the more powerful assault rifles developed late in the war. However, it was notably superior to the .45 caliber submachine guns in use at the time in both accuracy and penetration, and its lighter .30 caliber cartridge allowed soldiers to carry more ammunition. The M1 carbine was originally issued with a straight 15-round box magazine. However, when the Slickfire M2 carbine was introduced in October 1944, it came with a new curved 30-round box magazine. Following World War II, the 30-round magazine became the standard for both the M1 and M2 carbines, though the 15-round version continued to see use all the way through the Vietnam War. One of the most commonly used accessories for the M1 carbine was a standard magazine belt pouch, often slipped over the buttstock to hold 2 extra 15-round magazines. While this field modification was never officially sanctioned, it became a practical and effective way to carry additional ammo in combat. The M1 carbine was widely praised for its compact size, lightweight, and firepower, particularly by troops who couldn't easily carry a full-size rifle as their main weapon. However, its performance in frontline combat received mixed reviews, with early criticism emerging during the airborne operations in Sicily in 1943. The original design for the M1 carbine included plans for select fire capability like that of the M2, but this feature was dropped from the light rifle program to prioritize rapid production. On October 26, 1944, in response to the German military's widespread use of automatic weapons, particularly the STG-44, the Selectfire M2 carbine was introduced, accompanied by the new 30-round magazine. The M2 had a fully automatic rate of fire between 750 and 775 rounds per minute. Although full-scale production of the M2 didn't begin until April 1945, U.S. Ordnance issued conversion kits to modify semi-automatic M1 carbines into Selectfire M2s. These converted carbines saw limited combat use in Europe, mainly during the final Allied push into Germany. Again, in the film, in a quick shot, we can see one of the men patrolling the waters on the boat armed with the M1 carbine. In a different shot, we can also see one of the Amity Island deputies armed with one. During the scene in the film, when Hooper goes down in the shark cage with the spear, he can be seen filling it up with a poison that's supposed to kill the shark when he stabs it. This scene is a little done up for the plot of the movie, but the weapon he uses here is based on a real tool used in diving for shark defense. The spear he appears to be using here is a real spear called a shark dart repeater that was produced by the company Farallon in the 1960s and 1970s. Farallon was a California-based company known for producing diver propulsion vehicles, DPVs, which are battery-powered underwater scooters designed to tow divers in their gear through the water. But they also produce other diving accessories such as masts, fins, and spears. Founded near the San Francisco Bay and named after the nearby Farallon Islands, the company gained a reputation in the 1970s and 1980s for making rugged, professional-grade underwater propulsion systems. Their DPVs were used by commercial divers, scientific researchers, and even elite military units like the U.S. Navy SEALs. The real shark dart repeater made by the company Farallon, however, worked a little differently to the one that Hooper uses in the film. Again, in the movie, Hooper goes to fill up the spear with poison that is supposed to kill the shark. However, the real product actually didn't use poison, but instead relied on high-pressure bursts of CO2 to function as a close-range shark defense tool. When jabbed into the shark, the dart would release compressed CO2 gas, which rapidly expanded inside the body and caused massive internal damage, ideally incapacitating or killing the shark instantly. Unlike earlier shark darts that had to be reloaded after every use, the Farallon repeater held enough compressed CO2 to deliver multiple bursts via a gas discharge button before needing to be refilled. That's where the repeater name comes from. Although it's tough to find exact price points, most sources estimate it sold for around $300 in the 1970s, roughly $1,800 when adjusted for inflation. Unfortunately for Hooper, he almost immediately drops the spear when the shark slams into the cage from behind, so it never gets used. Another cool side note for the film is how the shark is said to be about 20 to 25 feet long. A bit of an exaggeration to their sizes in real life. Female great whites usually top out around 15 to 16 feet, while males average about 11 to 13. Not saying they can't get bigger, they can, but a 25-footer is extremely rare. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering why sometimes I call the shark Bruce, that's because Spielberg named the mechanical shark after his lawyer, Bruce Vermeer. This next piece of information is probably pretty common knowledge, but just in case you weren't aware, the mechanical shark used when filming was originally supposed to have much more screen time than it does in the final movie. However, once the crew got out on the water and started filming, the 3 mechanical sharks used in the film, 1 full body and 2 side-specific models, were plagued with malfunctions, particularly in the saltwater environment, as they would sink, stall, or just fail to operate as intended. These issues caused significant filming delays.
It's really hurt our schedule and, put a general somber note behind the scenes on the production, because we've been here 105 shooting days.
And forced Spielberg to adjust his direction and shooting style. Rather than relying on constant visual shots of the shark, he leaned into suspense, using suggestion, shadows, ominous music, and reaction shots to imply the shark's presence instead of constantly showing it. Ironically, this limitation turned out to be one of the film's greatest strengths. The lack of frequent visual exposure made the shark feel more unpredictable and terrifying, tapping into the audience's imaginations. Spielberg's choice to hint at the danger rather than show it outright created a far more suspenseful and iconic experience, one that played a huge role in Jaws becoming the landmark thriller it is. Another rifle that we can see used in the film by one of the fishermen appears to be a Carcano Rifle, which is a series of Italian bolt-action, internal box magazine-fed, repeating military rifles and carbines that were introduced in 1891. The rifle is chambered for the rimless 6.5 by 52mm Carcano round, and it was developed by Chief Technician Salvatore Carcano at the Turin Army Arsenal in 1890. The variant that the fisherman is using in the film appears to be a Carcano M91-41. The M91 refers to the original model 1891 design, and the 41 indicates the 1941 update, which was essentially a revision to longer-barreled configurations after a period of issuing shorter carbines. This version also featured simplified sights and less refined machining, which helped to efficiently make production faster and cheaper, something that was crucial during wartime. Being a bolt-action rifle, the rifle can hold 6 rounds of 6.5 by 52mm Carcano cartridges in its internal magazine, which can be loaded via a block clip, which uniquely gets automatically ejected through the ejection port on the underside of the rifle after the last round is chambered. With a barrel length of 27.1 inches, it's got an overall length of 48.2 inches. The rifle's accuracy was generally considered adequate for its time, especially with the round-nosed 6.5mm cartridge, which was pretty mild in recoil and accurate within 300 to 400 yards. However, some versions, especially wartime models, specifically ones late in the war, sometimes suffered from rougher finishes and less precise machining due to production pressures. After World War II, Italy had a massive stockpile of surplus rifles, millions of them, and following the end of the war in 1945, the Italian military began phasing out older weapon systems, including nearly the entire Carcano series. This created a huge glut of outdated, bolt-action rifles in 6.5 that were no longer suitable for modern, post-war warfare, which was moving towards semi-automatic and select-fire weapons. In need of money and no longer interested in keeping millions of obsolete rifles in warehouses, Italy began selling them off as military surplus. The U.S. civilian market, booming with surplus firearm imports in the 1950s and 60s, became a prime destination. The import batches were not limited to just the M91-41. In fact, the U.S. market was flooded with almost every model from the Carcano line. However, identification was sloppy, rifles were mismarked, misidentified, and mixed all together, especially because many were Arsenal reworks with mismatched serial numbers and parts from different years or factories. Because of this, exact numbers are hard to pin down, but it's estimated that hundreds of thousands of Carcano rifles were brought into the US, probably upwards of 250,000 or more, with the M91-41 making up a noticeable chunk, though not as numerous as the shorter carbines like the M91-38. Which brings me to another wild fact about this rifle. The Carcano rifle was the same one used by Lee Harvey Oswald in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. However, the variant that Oswald used in the assassination was an M91-38, which was equipped with a new 4x18 Japanese telescopic sight on a sheet metal side mount, which Oswald purchased for an extra $7, as he allegedly purchased the rifle through mail order for 1995. But ironically, this assassination was one of the factors leading to the passage of the Gun Control Act of 1968, which banned mail order sales of firearms. Hey guys, sorry to interrupt, just a quick message. If you're enjoying this kind of content and you want to help support the channel, maybe consider checking out our Patreon, link below and in the video's description. As you probably know, YouTube can be pretty tough on gun content sometimes when it comes to monetization. A few of my videos have already been demonetized in the past, and with some of the more extreme content I plan on covering, like John Wick or something like that, it's bound to happen again. Over on Patreon, it's just $1 a month, and you'll get the same videos plus extra behind-the-scenes content and more movie clips featuring the weapons we cover. Of course, it's totally optional, no pressure whatsoever, and I'm going to be posting here on YouTube no matter what. So again, just another way to help support the channel if you'd like. Alright, back to the video. Another rifle we get a quick shot of is in the beginning of the film when the fishermen catch the wrong shark and pose to take a picture with it. One of the men can be seen holding what appears to be a Winchester Model 61. While not a direct mechanical descendant, the Model 61 was designed to modernize Winchester's line of slide-action .22 rifles, such as the earlier Winchester Models 1890, 1906, and 62. Produced from 1932 to 1963, around 350,000 were manufactured. Unlike its predecessors, which had exposed hammers, the Model 61 was a hammerless, streamlined takedown design with a round barrel, giving it a sleeker, more modern look in the 1930s. Being a pump-action rimfire rifle, it could be chambered for .22 short, .22 long rifle, and .22 WRF Winchester rimfire. That version only appeared to be produced from 1933 to 1958, and today is one of the scarcest and most collectible variants of the Model 61. While some versions were single caliber specific, others were marked 22S, L, and LR, and could feed all three. Using its tubular magazine under the barrel, the rifle could range from 14 to 17 rounds depending on the type of .22 ammo you're using. Typically the rifle would feature open iron sights, though later some versions had grooved receivers for scope mounting, and the gun's standard barrel length was 24 inches. So another part I wanted to touch on that I figured some of you might be asking is, would this gun even make a dent when it comes to using it against a 3-ton, 25-foot great white shark? Yeah, there's about a 99.9% chance it will probably do absolutely nothing. Actually, if anything, you might end up just pissing off the shark more than anything else. Let me explain. So again, the Model 61 is a .22 caliber rimfire rifle that can be chambered for either .22 short, .22 long, or .22 long rifle. Out of those three, the .22 long rifle has the greatest muzzle energy, but even that only tops out at around 90 to 140 foot-pounds, and the cartridges themselves are typically round-nosed, non-expanding bullets with low penetration. So while that's great for things like squirrels, tin cans, or maybe the occasional snake, it's comically underpowered for taking on a 3-ton, 25-foot great white shark like Bruce is supposed to be in Jaws. A shark with 3 tons on him is probably going to have about 2 to 3 inches thick of skin cartilage and muscle you're going to have to get through, although this is just a rough estimate, as of course this can vary, and I'm not a shark anatomy expert. Not to mention they're constantly moving in water, which itself already dampens bullet energy. To do any real damage, you're going to have to hit vital organs like the brain or spinal column through dense tissue, with around the size of your pinky nail. So yeah, again, you're probably better off just using the rifle as a bat instead. Realistically, you would need to be at point blank range and firing repeatedly into things like its eyes or the brain. But at the end of the day, I guess it's better than nothing. We really only get a very quick shot of this rifle in the film, and it doesn't appear to actually be fired. Another rifle seen in the hands of one of the deputies when the two boys earlier in the film pull their shark prank on the beach appears to be a Winchester Model 1892. The Winchester Model 1892 is a lever-action repeating rifle designed by John Browning as a smaller, lighter version of his large-frame Model 1886, and the same rifle which replaced the Model 1873 as the company's go-to lever-action for pistol-caliber rounds such as the .44-40. Produced from 1892 to 1941, it is estimated that over 1 million of these rifles have been made, with a barrel length of around 20 inches for the Carbine version and 24 inches for the full-length barrel. Both utilize a tubular magazine, usually holding 10 to 12 rounds depending on the barrel length and cartridge. The action is smooth, fast, and strong, making it a favorite for ranchers, cowboys, and hunters, and it saw extensive use in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly in the American West. Although it wasn't a military rifle, it saw limited use in civilian and law enforcement roles, and even in various foreign military units in small numbers, and was well known for its reliability and fast handling.
What do you think? Zombie kill of the week?
Even though the Model 1892 came out after the American frontier had largely closed, and the true guns that won the West were actually the earlier models 1866 and 1873, it still became a Western icon thanks to its appearance in countless movies and TV shows, often standing in for its older counterparts. John Wayne had famously used Model 1892s in dozens of his films and even owned several himself, including some with his signature oversized loop lever. Other memorable screen-used 92s include Chuck Connor's rifle in The Rifleman, and Steve McQueen's sawed-off version in Wanted, Dead or Alive. Because of its compactness and balance, Winchester's 1892 is still popular today, especially among cowboy action shooters and collectors. Another rifle used by the fishermen that we get a quick shot of appears to be a Remington Model 700. The Remington Model 700 is a bolt-action, centerfire rifle that has been manufactured by Remington Arms since 1962. It was developed as an evolution of the earlier Remington Model 721 and 722 series, which first debuted in 1948. The Remington 700 series rifles typically come with a 3, 4, or 5 round internal magazine, depending on the caliber. Certain models are equipped with a hinged floor plate for faster unloading, while others can be configured to use a detachable box magazine. The M24 and the M40 military sniper rifles, both based on the Model 700 design, were used for decades by the United States Army and Marine Corps. While still in service today, their use is now much more limited. After World War II, Remington Arms engineer Mike Walker made it his mission to design a lower-cost alternative rifle to the Remington Model 30. This led to the development of the Model 721, which featured a cylindrical receiver made from round billet stock that could be turned on a lathe instead of requiring multiple milling operations, significantly cutting production costs. Smaller metal components like the bottom metal were stamped, and stocks were finished to a more basic standard compared to earlier models. With the rifle seeing further development under the direction of Walker, it resulted in the Model 722, 725, and ultimately the Model 700 in 1962. On top of being offered for civilian purchase, Remington also marketed the 700 to law enforcement agencies, with the law enforcement 700s referred to as the Model 700P, the P for police. The 700P series was influenced by the designs, features, and success of the M24 and M40 rifle series, again both of which were adopted and used for decades by the US Army and Marine Corps. Being that it is one of the most popular rifles in the world, with over 5 million having been sold as of today, I'm sure it will come as no surprise to hear that the 700 has one of the largest aftermarket ecosystems in the firearms world, with an incredible amount of different stocks, triggers, barrels, and optic rails all widely available to allow for a vast amount of modifications. These rifles are also widely considered the go-to sniper platform, as many Model 700s are capable of sub-MOA groups, less than 1 inch at 100 yards, making them a popular choice for long-range competitions. So kind of like how we were talking earlier with the Model 62, would this gun be an effective choice to try and kill the shark with? Well, you're still better off taking your chances with the Dynamite. However, between the two, the Remington Model 700 would be a far more effective weapon against a shark the size of Bruce and Jaws. While neither rifle was designed for taking down a 25-foot, 3-ton great white shark, the Model 700 can be chambered to fire some very powerful centerfire cartridges like the 30-aught Springfield, 300 Winchester Magnum, or the 308 Winchester for example. Rounds capable of deep penetration and significant damage, especially with well-placed shots to the head or spine, giving you a much greater chance over a gun like the Winchester Model 62, which again is a pump-action rimfire rifle usually chambered in .22, which is just not going to be a fun time for you up against a massive predator. So while it still wouldn't be ideal, the Model 700 would stand a much better chance. An interesting fact about the film that some of you may or may not know is how Jaws was the first major studio feature film where a large portion of filming occurred on the open ocean. Now, while there were certainly other films that came before it which had used the ocean for filming specific scenes, Jaws on the other hand was not just a few scenes shot at sea. It involved significant portions of the movie being filmed on the open ocean, specifically around Martha's Vineyard. The real ocean environment presented numerous difficulties for the filmmakers, including weather issues, mechanical shark malfunctions, and logistical hurdles. The Orca II, which was built as a replica for stunt and special effects shots, actually sank not once, but twice during filming. The film was originally supposed to be made on a budget of $4 million, but wound up costing about $9 million at the end of shooting. Apparently the effects outlays grew to $3 million alone due to the problems with the mechanical sharks. Although it's not a firearm, it's one of the various tools used against a shark in the film, and that, as you might remember, is Quints Machete. He uses it to cut the ropes to the barrels, and later attempts to stab Bruce in the face while being eaten alive. Big shout out to the Daily Jaws, link in the video description, as they appear to have identified this machete. It seems to be a French Army Indochina Senegalese machete, also known as a coupe or cut machete. Although I think it's worth noting that this has never been 100% confirmed by the production team. These machetes were widely used in French colonial campaigns and for agricultural work. A machete is a broad-bladed tool commonly used for farming and other manual tasks, much like an axe or as a weapon, functioning like a long, heavy knife. The blade typically ranges from 12 to 26 inches in length and is usually under an 1/8 inch thick. Beyond utility, machetes have also been used as weapons during uprisings and civil conflicts. Today, countries like Colombia, Brazil, and El Salvador are among the world's leading exporters of machetes. The traditional coupe was typically made with a forged steel blade, a wooden handle, and measured around 20 inches in length. Quint appears to lose the machete when he dies and the shark pulls him under. Another very interesting weapon that is used to try and kill the shark by one of the fishermen appears to be none other than dynamite. Also, a little side note too, if you look closely at the box the guy with the dynamite is holding, it appears to be a box of Marsh Wheeling cigars. Marsh Wheeling was a cigar company that was founded by Mifflin M. Marsh in 1840. Located in Wheeling, West Virginia, it was actually one of the oldest cigar manufacturing companies founded in the United States. The company was known for selling their brand of stogies, which were sold at a low price point, although they're no longer produced. The company's products have not only appeared in Jaws, but also in the movies such as The Green Mile and How the West Was Won. Not a weapon, but I just noticed that when making this video and thought it would be fun to cover. Plus I like cigars. But anyways, back to the explosives. So dynamite is an explosive made of nitroglycerin, sorbents, such as powdered shells or clay, and stabilizers. It was invented by the Swedish chemist and engineer Alfred Nobel in northern Germany and patented in 1867. You might be scratching your head right now thinking, wow, that name Nobel sounds pretty familiar. And well, that's probably because that's the very same man who created the Nobel Prize Awards. For those who are unfamiliar, the Nobel Prize is a set of annual international awards bestowed in several categories by Scandinavian committees. It recognizes individuals and organizations who have made outstanding contributions in the fields of physics, chemistry, physiology or medicine, literature, peace, and since 1969, economics. The story of how he came to create the awards is actually pretty interesting too. But let me preface this by saying the story is not 100% confirmed by historians, and at the end of the day, Alfred never gave any specific written explanation to why he created it in the final years of his life, so in reality it still remains speculative, but there's very strong circumstantial evidence to back up the claim, and there's a lot of things that did happen, which are confirmed, that led many to believe this was the reason for why he did what he did. For one, in 1888, when Alfred's brother Ludwig died in Cannes, a French newspaper published an obituary for him, but they made it for Alfred by mistake. Specifically, the article condemned Alfred for his invention of dynamite, reportedly calling him a merchant of death, who became wealthy by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before. Now, this might be more of a paraphrase of what the actual article called him, since an original copy of the newspaper article has not been found. So although that's not an exact quote, it's widely believed the article was headlined as something similar. So again, this is why many historians call this story speculative. Nobel was said to have been deeply disturbed by this glimpse of how history might judge him, as someone who profited from destruction. However, a few years later, in 1895, Alfred would go on to revise his will, dedicating most of his fortune to fund prizes in science, literature, and peace. And many believe the reasons he went on to do this was to change his legacy. So again, without the original newspaper article, or an exact confirmation from the man himself, this story can be seen as fact or fiction depending on who you ask. But personally, I do believe this was truthfully why he went on to create it in the end. At least to me, it makes the most sense. With all the scenes of movie magic in this film, you would think one of them would include the guy throwing dynamite in the ocean for it to still work. But believe it or not, that scene is actually more realistic than you think. So can dynamite still work when thrown in water? The answer is yes, but only when prepared properly, as it needs to have a water-resistant fuse, and of course it just needs to stay lit long enough to reach the detonator. Waterproof safety fuses have existed as far back as the early 1900s, and were typically made with a coated outer layer, often wax or tar, to repel moisture. Just like that of a non-waterproof fuse, it leads to a blasting cap, which then sets off the stick of dynamite. Obviously this wasn't created specifically for shark hunting, as originally it was developed because certain jobs absolutely required blasting things underwater. Civil engineers and construction crews could use it to blast rocks, debris, and bedrock beneath rivers or harbors during bridge building, dam construction, and port deepening. Loggers could use it to break up massive log jams in rivers, and even specific groups like navies and military engineers could use it for things like clearing underwater obstacles, destroying enemy infrastructure, or creating beachheads for amphibious landings. So again, is it realistic in the film for the fisherman to be using it against a shark? Yes. Is it safe? Hell no. But this does lead me to point out another interesting fact for the film, is how they did use real explosives not only here in this scene, but in the final climactic scene when Brody blows up the shark. They literally stuffed one of the fake sharks with things like raw hamburger meat, steaks, and other kinds of animal guts, then detonated it out on the open water. So that blast at the end with the shark's guts flying everywhere was real. To safely do this, they brought out Navy explosives expert Richard S. Edwards, who at the time was working with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, to handle the explosives. Unfortunately for the crew that day, it apparently was one of the worst smells, as the shark that was packed with raw meat was sitting out in the hot sun for hours before they actually went through with the explosion. Well, that's going to do it for this one. As always, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if I missed anything, if I got anything wrong down in the comments. If you like this kind of content, subscribe for more. But yeah, thanks for watching.